everybody. I'm Megan Lewin. Um, Super excited to be here. Very passionate about sharing this topic. I have spent the first 10 years of my career working in settings where my students can't practice at home. And I've been a user of MakeMusic Cloud, the OG SmartMusic, since its inception. So I'm just very passionate about sharing a different way you can go about using this platform than you may have seen before. Just gonna hide this real quick. All right, and here we go. I have a QR code for a handout for this presentation, and I do have it later in the presentation as well, but I'll make sure to hover back over that at the end if you would like to take any of this information with you in a Google document. To start the session, I want us to reflect for a minute on what brought us to this session. What inspired you to discuss this topic with me today? If we were in person, we'd be talking to each other so we could find some common ground. So I want you to think about, can your students practice at home? Do they have a safe space? Do they have enough space? Is it quiet enough? Do they have the resources they need to practice outside of your classroom? If they can, do they know how to practice effectively? And how could it be more effective if they do have the resources to make that process happen? If they cannot practice at home, how does that affect your program? Are you able to play the music you want to play? Are you able to address your students' needs? Do you feel like they're progressing in a way that works for them and for you? The goal of this session is that you will have actionable ideas for your next school year, whether or not your students can practice at home. And the agenda that's going to guide our work today is we're going to work on engaging rehearsal strategies based on building relationships, incorporating MakeMusic Cloud, mostly with large group instruction, and then a concept I use in my classroom that I call personal practice time. Maya Angelou said it best. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. That's what our students want from us. They want to feel that we are interested in their lives and we know who they are. So who are your students? Can you answer these questions? What are they interested in your program and outside of it? What do they do outside of your classroom on the day-to-day? Why are they in the music program? Did their grandpa play the trumpet and now their parents are saying they have to play it too? Maybe they are there for their chosen family, or maybe they love the competitive atmosphere. Why did they choose to be in your classroom? What is their home life like? Because more often than not, this is influencing them on the day-to-day, and it's for sure influencing their ability to practice at home. And why can't they practice at home? What barriers are standing in their way? Because maybe they really, really want to, but they don't. And knowing why will help you build more effective rehearsal strategies and help them figure out a way that maybe they could practice at home. How can you go about asking them about their lives? You're not just going to learn this in rehearsal every day if you're only focusing on music. So here are the ways that I learn about my students every day. My district requires that we stand at the door for safety reasons to greet our students and just check on the hallway, but it's an awesome policy. It means every single day in every class, I get to look my students in the eye and give them a greeting and say their name, ask them about their day, and just see how they're doing and where we're at before we even start rehearsal, before we even get our instruments out. I also walk around a lot during setup and cleanup time. Yes, I could be studying my score, or I could be cleaning up a mess in the corner, but I choose to use that time to get to know my students better. Because, once I do, they can be the ones that are helping clean things up and all that other fun stuff. I also do getting to know you note cards or a Google survey. I've done both depending on the year or one or the other. And that way I can take the note cards and the Google survey information and I can study it and practice it, taking attendance. I have the note cards up on my podium so I can bring up fun facts about the students and connect with them on a new level. And I also offer office hours. And yes, that's for academic purposes too. But my students know that if my office door is open, they can come in and just talk to me. And we can talk about life and what's going on. And they know that I will give them the help that they need if that door is open. So once you know who your students are, you can meet them where they are versus where they should be. And I put should be in quotations. I've always worked in a program where it just felt like, oh, my students are only playing a grade 1. They should be playing something harder. Well, maybe not. Maybe that grade 1 is providing everything they need at that moment. And maybe my high schoolers aren't ready for a grade 3 or 4, and that's okay. If they feel seen and heard and are invested in what we're doing and feel safe, that's all that matters to me. And once I know them, I can also incorporate their interests and experiences into the curriculum so that they have more buy-in. They feel like it's our curriculum and our classroom, not just mine. And it increases their voice and choice. They can help me with the repertoire choices. For the first few concerts, I give them an array of repertoire to choose from. We listen to it as a team and decide what fits best for our ensemble. And by the end of the year, they're choosing the entire spring concert by themselves for what works for us. They help decide what warm-ups we want to play. They love choosing the chorale of the day based on the key signature we need and the style we're working on in our pieces. We have an equipment crew so that, I know how to put chairs and stands away. I don't need to do that every day. And the students love the ownership of being in charge of keeping our space beautiful and functional. And just any other leadership roles you can possibly provide for them. Our students, they just revel in the ability to help their peers and to help the program and know that they're part of something bigger than themselves. Beyond building relationships and really in conjunction, a little bit of mindfulness goes a long way. And this is a huge passion of mine. It developed out of the pandemic, and it is now a huge staple of my program that has just changed the game. Because our students' stress is valid and their struggles are they're very real. Sometimes it feels like, oh, that's just, teenage drama, they're just overblowing that situation. Not to them. That stress, those struggles, that's their whole life. And if we can step back and see that from their perspective and offer ways for them to process it, wow, they really will open up and engage with your rehearsal in a new way because they feel seen and heard and they know that you're there for them. You get what's going on. It helps them practice processing stress, which is a huge part of trauma-informed practices. If our students don't know what to do with the stress in their bodies, that's when they're acting out. That's when they're disengaged. That's when they're causing problems for rehearsal, and students aren't able to practice even in your classroom. So by helping them process with a little bit of mindfulness, they're able to really engage with your class and make meaningful connections with you and the content. If we were in person, I'd have us all do this together. It feels so nice just to take a break for ourselves too, as the stressed out adult in the situation. So the example of a mindfulness activity, it takes 2 minutes or less, is a breathing ball, which I'm sure a lot of you have in your classrooms as music educators. So you have your students find a space to stand in the classroom with their feet hip width apart, nice and balanced, and you take your breathing ball and you have everybody in the room breathe together on whatever counts you want. The example I have here is 4, 2, and 8, but it would go something like this. You would breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4. In through your nose, 2, 3, 4. Out through your nose, 2, 3. One more time, and in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4. So that would just be round one. And then round two, round three, whatever works for you, however much time you want to spend on it. But I promise you, invest those 2, 3 minutes at the beginning of class, and you will gain them back tenfold throughout the rehearsal because the students have processed their physical stress. They're connecting to their breath, which, holy cow, don't we need that as musicians? They're connecting with their peers, they're connecting with their bodies, and then they're ready to go. And it feels great as the adult too to just take that minute to reset. Another way to increase the effectiveness of your rehearsal strategies in general is incorporating MakeMusic Cloud. And I use this mostly in a large group instruction setting. Traditionally, MakeMusic Cloud is used one-on-one for individual student support, for practicing, for playing tests. That just didn't work for me in my classroom and still doesn't because my students aren't able to use it at home. So why am I going to spend all that money when it's not being used effectively? Now I use it in a hybrid setting where I use it in a large group instruction with all of my ensembles, and then maybe one or two of my classes have individual accounts for the students that are ready to practice on their own more. So for large group instruction, I use MakeMusic Cloud for decoding, gamification, composition, and recording student progress. So in my program and the programs I've always taught in, my students have really, really strong ears and not so strong eyes. Their reading skills are just not their strong suit. And so we are working on decoding skills every single day to get better at decoding the notes and rhythms and being able to read faster and more effectively. So in a large group setting, we use MakeMusic Cloud to work on rhythm reading skills as well as sight reading skills with the sight reading builder, which is awesome. I can't wait to tell you about it in just a second. For rhythm reading skills, what I do pretty much every single day of the year is project a desired rhythm on the screen at the front of the room. In my time, I've had smart boards to do this. I've projected on with a projector. I've projected onto a whiteboard. I currently have like a projector TV set up. But whatever you have, as big as you can make it at the front of the room so everybody's focused in the same spot. And then I take the Compose tool and MakeMusic Cloud, and I pull the example from the music that we're working on. Or I go in and find a pre-made example that works for what we're doing if I don't have the time to pull the separate example. Then the students write in the counting. And I do this with student leaders. So they come up to the board and they're the ones in charge of asking their peers, how do I count this measure? Write it in. How do I count this measure? Write it in. And then once everything is written out correctly with my guidance, then the students go through and count the rhythm on a steady beat. And then a band teacher, so we do a lot of sizzling to get the back pressure and the air moving. We might clap it one day or snap it or body percussion, and then play it on a single note. If you teach orchestra, it can be on a single string or maybe you're string crossing. In band, we typically pick the first note of the key we're in. And then after we've gone through this process, then we go find that rhythm in context and practice it in the piece right away. It looks like this. This is my MakeMusic Cloud. Here's my Compose tool. I have pulled a section of Rocket Ship by Kevin Day, which we played this year. And I have this up on the screen in my classroom. And then student leaders come up. I just blew it up so you could see it more clearly. And the student leaders, as a team, as a class, they work to make sure the rhythm is written correctly. And then either the students or I count it off in tempo and we point, like follow the bouncing ball style, like rest, 2 and 3 and 1, 2 and 3 and up, and so on. Very, very visual, as clear as humanly possible. And then we might clap it, stomp it, sizzle it, play it, etc. Does this process involve some rote? Yeah, it does. I honor my students' strengths. Like I said, they have really strong ears and not so strong eyes. So as we're working on our reading skills getting better, I'm going to use that strong ear, that strong oral skill. They can They can pretty much play anything I play at them, or say at them, or sing at them. And I'm going to use that. I'm not going to penalize them for having this superpower. And this process also addresses multiple learning styles. So within 5 minutes, we've done visual learning, oral, kinesthetic, interpersonal. They're connecting to their breath, to their instrument, to their body, to the ensemble really quickly. So this next video is going to show you how to find the Compose tool in MakeMusic Cloud, and then how you can find those pre-made examples if you're not looking to make your own.
Here is how to find the Compose tool and pre-made rhythm reading exercises in MakeMusic Cloud so that you can work on decoding skills with your students in a large group setting. To find the Compose tool, you're going to go to the home screen and you're going to go toggle over the left until you see the Compose name title. So you click on that. It brings you to 3 options. You can either do a quick creation, create from a template, or import a different music file from a different music notation software. It's up to you which one you choose. You can pull something you've already made, or if you need to make it here, you add the rhythm reading, the note decoding, whatever you're working on here, and then you can save it to your your MakeMusic Cloud account. You can download it as an XML file or a PDF, so you can use it in different software or project it as a PDF, or assign it directly to your students to use on their own if they have their own MakeMusic Cloud accounts set up. So that's how you find the Compose tool. And then to find the pre-made exercises, go back to the home screen. And from here, we're going to scroll down and look to our right until we see this tan box that says exercises. And then you're going to click on SmartMusic Exercises Rhythms. And here you get to explore. There are tons of examples of rhythm that range from very simple to quite advanced. And you just look through and see what's great for you and your students. Say you pick simple time 2, pattern 3. We're going to open that for flute. Why not? We're focusing on rhythm, so the pitch itself does not super matter, at least for my purposes in my classroom. And if this works for you and your students, great. Here is what you can project to the board without having to reinvent the wheel and make your own resources. So whether you're using the Compose tool to create your own rhythm reading examples to pull from your music, or you're using the pre-made examples because they're still getting after the skills you need, MakeMusic Cloud makes it really simple to work on decoding skills with your students in a large group setting and a very Here is how to find.
All right, so let me get this to be bigger again. Okay. So other than decoding with the Compose tool or the pre-made examples, another way I use MakeMusic Cloud for decoding skills in general is the sight reading builder. This was such a game changer when this came out. This is a relatively new tool within MakeMusic Cloud, and it's getting revamped soon too. So the great thing about this is it's rapid fire examples in a really short amount of time. So you're not taking out all of the scores in your library and trying to put them back when you're done. It's all on the screen and it's digital. And you get to set the parameters of what skills are being presented to your students. So if they're only ready for 4/4 in concert B flat with quarter notes with the first 5 notes of the scale, great. That's all they're going to see. And it can also double as a note and rhythm reading decoding session as well. So maybe you're not having them all sight read it by playing it, but maybe you're stopping and saying, turn to your partner and tell them all the pitch names. Name every single note. Okay, turn to someone else. Count the rhythm to them. Just another way to practice decoding skills if you're in a program like mine where that is just so imperative for their success and their growth. So this video is going to show you how I use the sight reading builder.
Here is how I use the sight reading builder tool in MakeMusic Cloud to work on sight reading skills in a large group setting. In the home screen, you're going to toggle down to the sight reading builder. And when you get here, you're going to have a few options. You can use solo instruments, pre-made ensembles, or custom ensembles. I typically go to custom ensembles, band, and beginning band for my purposes. And then I go through and I remove instruments that I don't need for that specific class. So for example, I don't need oboe, so I'm going to go to C more and remove that staff. I've already done this process to make this video faster, and I typically reduce my sight reading builder to 5 lines. I have the flute line for flute and mallets, the clarinet line for clarinets, bass clarinets, trumpets, and tenor saxophones, keeping in mind that sometimes we need to talk about moving octaves around. So it's up to you if you want to keep a tenor line or a trumpet line to prevent that, but my classes have been fine with just 1 line for B-flat instruments. We have a line for E-flat instruments, alto saxes, bari saxes. Unfortunately, I don't have any horns in my beginning groups that are working on the sight reading builder the most, so I don't have a horn line right now, but you might have one. A line for trombone, euphonium, and a line for the tubas. Once I have my 5 lines, I can pick the different tempi we want to work on for that day. I typically put in 4 to 8 measures here so that the examples are small enough to project on my screen. And then I select the level. We typically start with level 1, so it's super easy, super approachable. And then if I want to, I can go back through and adjust the different time signatures. Maybe I want options of 2, 4, 3, 4, 4, 4. I can go through and put the possible concert key signatures. I can go through and pick all the rhythmic patterns that are possible for them to see, as well as their range for each instrument, the intervals they might see, and articulations and dynamics. I usually keep it pretty simple for my beginning groups, and then I make it as big as possible to project on my screen. And let's see, nope. This laptop I'm on is way too sensitive for this right now. But once I have this blown up as large as possible for the class, we mentally go through the exercise first. They get 10 silent seconds to prepare. We talk about the key, the time signature, what types of notes we're about to see, and then we go. We sight read. And the awesome gamified thing about this is every time I click on this wheel, a brand new example pops up over and over and over. So you're not getting out tons of scores. You're not dealing with a ton of paper to organize. This is up on the projector screen, and we can sight read 5, 10, 15, however many examples you want in a really short amount of time. You can also play the example back. And so on. So if your students learn really well by ear like mine do, sometimes we'll play through the example, and then I'll say, all right, let's ask MakeMusic Cloud if we were right. And then I'll play it for them, and they have to decide if their sight reading performance was the same as the MIDI that's coming out of MakeMusic Cloud. And it's just a really fun, gamified way to get your students sight reading as much as humanly possible. Here's how.
All right. My students love the sight reading builder. I had 55 beginners in my program this year at the high school level, just because of feeder fun times, and they loved it. And my older classes love it too, because you can make it more advanced to fit your students' needs. So I mentioned gamification in that video. Gamification was a game changer when I first started teaching at the middle school level. It's fun to sprinkle in a little bit of healthy competition into your classes. It makes getting better at the content a bragging right. And isn't that what we want? We want the students to be proud of themselves and excited to share how much better they're getting at what we do every day. And if you're gamifying and you want to offer prizes, go for it. Offer whatever will motivate your students the most. It might be candy. If you're in a district that allows food, my middle schoolers loved Dum Dums and Tootsie Pops, and those were huge motivators. You can also offer prizes that are not food-based, they're experience-based. So maybe your students get to answer the phone that day, or be your assistant, or whatever makes them excited to win that competition is the best prize. So a gamification example, I did this every single week when I taught middle school orchestra. We would count the same rhythm every day of the week. We'd pick it on Monday and practice it. We'd practice as a group at the front of the screen like I modeled for you earlier, and we'd practice individually to make sure every single person in the room felt confident performing this rhythm. And then at the end of the week, the most accurate and the fastest student would win a prize. And that's typically a lollipop of some kind or the experience of being a leader. But the students would choose how to compete. So one week it might be whoever can count the example the fastest wins and most accurately. The next week it might be clapping. The next week it might be bowing on an open string. In the band setting, it might be playing on a note or crowing your reed or whatever you need to work on. But the students loved the buy-in of deciding how they were going to compete. The ultimate prize of gamifying your curriculum is that your students are developing their musical skills, period. The engagement will increase as well as their focus because, you're using screens. Let's use the screens for our advantage instead of against us because our students love screens. You're also developing evaluation skills. The students help me determine who the winner is in these gamified situations. So if they're not listening correctly or they're choosing their best friend, it's an opportunity to step back and say, well, did they actually play that correctly? Why or why not? And how could it be better? So that everyone's evaluating themselves and their peers as part of their team. And they're having fun. Play is an incredibly powerful tool at every level, and especially our student ages, elementary, middle, and high school. We can't forget that what we do is fun, and it'll be more memorable if we turn it into a game that they'll never forget. So beyond gamifying, you can also use the composition tool in MakeMusic Cloud to work on the skill of composition as a class. And I'm going to show you two videos how I've done this in two different settings, because there's one way to do it where everybody's in the same key and same clef, and then you have to modify slightly if you have multiple keys and clefs in the band setting. But you can also use the composition tool in small group settings and individually to check for understanding, because the ultimate level of showing understanding is creating. So if you want your students to be creating in 4/4, having them show you how quarter notes and half notes and whole notes interact in a measure, it's going to show you what they understand and what you might need to go back and work on. So here's the first video on using the composition tool to work on composition.
Here is how you can use the Compose tool in MakeMusic Cloud to work on composition skills with your students in a large group setting. From the home screen, you're going to go over to the Compose tool. And from here, I always open a quick creation just to get a blank finale style file on the projector in front of my students. When I had a smartboard, this was the ultimate kinesthetic learning opportunity. And it built a connection in my students' brains that they didn't make otherwise with their notation reading ability. I've always taught students who have struggled to decode notation because they're not strong readers in any language, really. So adding this other one, it just gets complicated. There is something about the physical kinesthetic connection of dragging and dropping notes onto a staff that made that connection for some of them that wouldn't before and just were struggling. So here's how I did this with my middle school orchestra and how I still do it with my high school band. And we always start with just pitch because it gets more complicated. Not pitch, with just rhythm, because it gets more complicated when you start to add pitch, because in orchestra you have multiple clefs, even though you're in the same key. And in band, we're just transposing all over the place and it gets a little more complicated. So we start with just rhythm when I teach this activity. So what we do is we have the blank finale style file on the board, or, back in the day before MakeMusic Cloud had a Compose tool, I would do this in Finale and then upload it into MakeMusic or SmartMusic at the time. But now it's awesome because they're totally integrated and it's all in one. So I'd have a student leader come up to the board and I would set the parameters for the class and say, today your options are quarter notes and eighth notes. And because we're focusing on rhythm right now, we're going to put everything on concert A. It's just easy to see. So I'd have a student leader come up to my smartboard. They would click on a quarter note. They would hover over what they wanted and click on the staff. And there is that kinesthetic connection. They're touching where the note belongs on the staff. They're hearing the pitch. They're seeing it drop correctly. And say they go up and they hit the wrong pitch, it's an opportunity for you to check in with that individual and see if it was a mistake or if they truly don't understand what concert A means. And it's an learning opportunity for everybody in your classroom. And you can have students come up one by one to the board. You can have a student leader stay at the board, and maybe they're going to delegate who gets to decide each measure. It's up to you. If you don't have a smart board, like I don't have one anymore, you can have a student leader at the computer that's projecting, or you can stay the leader and you can just ask students for their input. Say, hey, flute section, what do you want for measure 2? Oh, you want a quarter note, a quarter rest, a quarter note, a quarter rest? Great, you've got it, you're hired. Once you have the composition that you're looking for, you can play it back so your students can hear what they've worked so hard on together. This provides another opportunity for evaluation skills. They get to decide what they like, what they want to keep. They get to decide if they want to change something, and then they can actively change it. And then they can listen back as many times as you want until they're satisfied. And you can make it as long as or short as you want. Once they're satisfied, you can play the rhythm composition on a single note in your classroom. So you can tell everybody we're going to be on a concert A, or whatever pitch you want that makes sense for what you're working on in your classroom at that time. But the students are so proud to play something that they've created as a team, that they've created as a family, and it really deepens their understanding of how to read notation, which if your students are like mine, that is incredibly powerful. It's empowering for them moving forward, and it really increases their engagement in the classroom. Here.
And then this next video, I'm so sorry, I forgot the horns. Like I said earlier, I don't have horns at my beginning level when I'm doing this activity more, so completely spaced, so sorry. But here's how you can take that activity and then use kind of differentiate it out for pitch and clef.
Here is how I've adapted to using pitch in MakeMusic Cloud as a class composition tool when you're dealing with multiple clefs or multiple keys that you're in. Multiple clefs for orchestra and band, and then multiple transposing instruments for band. So when I was in the orchestra setting, I was lucky that my classes were on the smaller side. I was in a small charter school, so my classes were about 25 or less. And in the string orchestra setting, we were playing in the treble clef, the alto clef, and the bass clef. And so it was easier for me to simply teach my students how to read in all the clefs. And so what we would do is just add the key, which was typically D major at the beginning level, and we'd apply that. And then each day we'd choose a different clef to practice. So one day it would be the treble clef, another the alto, another the bass. And then when they go to add their pitch, say you're using quarter notes and eighth notes again, now the rules become you can use the first 3 notes of your scale. So just for time's sake, sure. And it's not a perfect system, but in the large group setting, it's a little funky still, that even though the string orchestra is all looking at the treble clef, because they can read it, they still know how to play that on their own instrument, even if they're an alto clef playing or a bass clef playing instrument. They just learned how to adjust. So it wasn't a perfect decoding practice, but they were still able to compose together in a way that was meaningful to them. In the band setting, it gets more complicated. So I typically have a class composition template pulled up that looks pretty similar to my sight reading builder. So I have 5 lines that address all the different keys we're in. So flute and mallets can be in concert pitch. I have my clarinets, trumpets, and tenors in B flat, my altos and baries in E flat, my trombones, euphoniums, bassoons in my bass clef, but concert pitch. And then I have my tubas with their own line just because they're reading so many more ledger lines than everybody else. And then from here, as we're adding pitch, typically in concert B flat, typically using the first 3 notes of our scale, I might have one line at a time do a measure. And then I'll go back and quickly grab it and paste it into the other keys. And when I have the time, not in a quick video for a session, I would obviously go through and adjust these octaves, unless you want to scare your trombone, euphonium, bassoon, tuba fam. But yeah. So that way, one measure at a time, the students are still leading the process, but when you're done, they're able to read the correct notes so that when you're playing it back as a class, it's not just an absolute disaster because they're all in different keys. So that's one way I've adjusted, either to practice multiple clefs or to practice with various keys. But either way, we're still able to.
Sorry, it keeps cutting me off at the end of my videos, but I'm just wrapping up so you're not missing anything. All right, so the last way that I use MakeMusic Cloud to increase effectiveness in the large group setting is recording student progress. Typically in the large group. In the small group, I use it as a sectional tool. So if I send the flutes off to work on a section, they bring at least one MakeMusic Cloud account with them. So that way they have a practice buddy with them, and MakeMusic Cloud acts like an assistant teacher because they can look at the notes and check pitch and check fingerings and check how the part goes without me in the room. And then for my class, it does have individual accounts. It helps evaluate their performances because they're recording their individual performances. So for time's sake, let's see, I have 2 videos here. I'm just going to show you the first one on how I record progress in the large group setting because that's a little more complicated.
Here is how you can use MakeMusic Cloud as a recording tool to work on evaluating performances with your students in a large group, small group, and individual setting. In the large group setting, what I'll do is I'll pull up the piece we're working on for that day, such as Blue and Green Music by Samuel Arhazo, and a section that we want to record so that way they can hear themselves back. And you can toggle between sections as needed if you want to capture multiple, but for this example, we're going to capture the clarinet 1 part. We're going to hover over the section that we want them to hear back because maybe we're trying to match articulation across the section, or maybe we're trying to capture that someone's rushing or someone's dragging and we're just not quite together yet and they just need to hear themselves back. So what I'll do is I'll turn off the clarinet part and I'll turn down the accompaniment so it's still there, but they're really focusing on their own part and matching it up with the metronome. And then what I'll do is press the record button. And we'll make it melodic through the microphone. We'll test the microphone. Once you've done one recording, you won't need to do this again. And then we're going to start. And naturally, in real life, when it's not just me listening to the recording on my own laptop, these notes won't look so crazy because they'll capture what my students are actually playing, which, hopefully and theoretically is all correct. So it would turn green. Because I did have the accompaniment still going on in the background, it was catching some of those notes. That's why some of them did turn green despite no audio input, and why some of them are yellow, but mostly red because no one was actually playing out loud. And then to listen back, you're going to click on this little purple button. And hooray, we heard my laptop playing music for itself. It will save your takes. So you only have one right now, but it will go through. It'll tell you the percentage. That's not what we're going for right now, but the percent that was played correctly, the tempo at which you played it. You can delete it, you can save it. It's up to you. But then you can have your clarinet section listen back to themselves and reflect. What went well? What do we want to work on? Open it up to the whole band so that they can give constructive feedback to their classmates, to their ensemble mates, so that we're all growing together as one band, one family. In a smaller group setting, say you're working on a section.
I'm going to stop the video there since we're focusing on the large group setting. And then the very last thing I want to bring up and talk about is something I use in my classroom that I call personal practice time. And this is how I'm teaching my students how to practice, but I'm teaching this in the large group setting. And so I have frequent periods of personal practice time in every rehearsal. I would say at least 3 to 5 times. And I'll show you the format in a second. But the purpose of this is I have frequent check-ins that are formal and informal so that my students are practicing on their own within class time and know that they're responsible at the end of that time for performing. I explicitly model what practicing looks like. Sorry, I thought this would go away on its own. It didn't. So I'm explicitly modeling what practicing looks like, so that way students know in the classroom and outside what effective practice is. I'm able to walk around the room and help my students on an individual basis and watch what's going on with their progress. And it's really great for dealing with behavior without losing time. And here's how. So I will say, use your imagination that you're my high school band. I will say, all right, class, you have 1 minute on the clock to practice measures 1 through 8. And I'll look at my watch or set a timer. On your mark, get set, go. And for exactly 1 minute, I will walk around, I will answer questions, I will fix instruments, I'll address behavior. If something is going to derail class, I will say, all right, personal practice time, and run over and address it so that everyone else is still getting something done. When I say time, I go back to the podium, baton up, play those 8 measures, and then spot check for accountability. And that might be section by section. It might be whoever's wearing glasses that day, or individually if your students are ready for it. But no matter how you go through personal practice time, your students are learning how to practice, which they need no matter where they're practicing, with you or on their own at home. And they're learning to use their time effectively in the classroom. So that way, no matter what's going on, they know how to get their job done. It increases their accountability and leadership because you're not next to every single person. So they have to be able to practice on their own and help their peers. And it helps my students feel seen and heard about practice time outside of class because they understand that that's not possible for everybody. And I get that. And home practice becomes more effective, which is what we all want. So to summarize, to increase engagement in your classroom, you need to invest time in your students as people, as human beings foremost, before musicians. Meet them where they are, versus like who cares where they should be? Meet them where they are. Incorporate their ear and their eye. Use MakeMusic Cloud because it's an awesome tool in whatever setting you need it to be effective in your rehearsal strategies. And use personal practice time to help your students learn to use every single minute of class time effectively. If you ever want to share ideas or ask questions, please email me there. The QR code takes you to my handout. And thank you so much for attending the session today.